Hi, my name's Tony Ridley and welcome to another Crisis Leadership and Management Education tutorial. In this section we're talking about communications, the ability to send and receive communications which supports your crisis management objectives or is a facilitation tool to share knowledge both internally, externally, as well as to the ability to collect. So first of all, let's just re-examine a couple of the basics. Let's look at the advent of, and I've got social media as a bullet point here. However, don't think of it in terms of social media, but the aspects of media controlled by social individuals and or groups. So the evolution over recent times in the last few years, and certainly accelerated in the last 12 to 18 months, is that previously or historically, when we had a piece of communication or a point of communication, one individual had the ability to communicate to a handful of individuals. Those handful of individuals would then also be able to communicate with a handful of individuals. So the rate of communication, a mathematical formula would be 1 to 3 to 3, and you would get a multiplier, for example, of 1, 4 people then know, then you're talking 13 people, and so on and so forth. So the rate or the viral nature of communications was really inhibited or limited by one person's ability or to communicate or the size of the network. But if we look at the social media publication, the internet, the distribution, and certainly the acceleration of community voices, what we've got now is multiple channels in terms of distribution. We've got headline-based elements such as Twitter, we've got audio-visual such as YouTube, we've got RSS, which is sort of succinct trickle feed news, regular content, we've got Facebook, we've got a whole bunch of social channels where there are millions of individuals, there are people with large amounts of following, platforms, publications and systems where we can really amplify the distribution process. So instead of going from one person to another person, it now goes to a channel which goes to multiple individuals, which in turn communicates with potentially thousands, if not millions of individuals. And the viral nature, when we talk in terms of sort of communicable diseases, for example, not that communications is a disease, but the rate of infection, for example, of some diseases and the viral nature of certain viruses is the rate of infection. So to go from one person to another and then that person's got a cough or touch, you know, this is on the very extreme end of viral nature. And the rate of infection or the potential mathematical equation is that we can reach millions of individuals in a much faster time frame than was ever possible previously. So everyone needs to remember this, because this is a double-edged sword in terms of the speed in which we can communicate, but the information about us can also be communicated. So it's often a basic fundamental principle that a lot of people simply overlook because of their corporate parameters, or Facebook's blocked in the workspace, or there is corporate affairs for communications. People often lose a sense in terms of the communication ability of one individual as opposed to a platform, as opposed to being able to access millions or potentially, you know, tens of millions of individuals. So what it's given now is a reach and depth and capacity that simply was not in the hands of individuals previously. Not since the printing press has it impacted the communication space of the viral nature and the platforms and the apps and the tweets and the updates and social status and bookmarking, and the list goes on. So much so that the space for communications when it comes to social media is extremely fragmented. You know, there's different mediums, there's different platforms, there's different software. Some do one or more, and again, this continues to be, even for experts and subject matter professionals in the space of communication, social media marketing, it's an ever-changing landscape. So from a crisis perspective, crisis communication perspective, not only do you need to be aware of it, but you also need to be able to tap into and also defend against potentially these sorts of platforms as well. So in general terms, the communication prism itself is is a circular process, but it's not just crisis, it's also being touched upon through communities. We've got corporates, we've got supports, we've got products and services, we've got marketing, branding, feedback, reputation, participation, groups, news. We've got so many overlapping pieces of noise that the complexity and the speed is overwhelming for even the most professional organizations and certainly groups. So as a cornerstone, before we move into subsequent sessions, it's very important to remember the ability to be able to communicate, and also the ability for people to communicate on you without going through official channels. So a lot of the gatekeepers, a lot of the stewardshipness and even professionalism, many would say, in terms of filtering and editing, has been removed. So many people can say comments and updates in lightning speed with very little editorial processes, and you are left to subsequently deal with it. So bear that in mind, and that's essentially forms the basis for the first stage of communications as it relates to crisis management. So that concludes this section here. For more education, information and tutorials on crisis management, please visit the website www.crisismanagement.tony-ridley.com. That's all for now. Thanks. Bye.